I'll wait till our president is seated and then we'll begin. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending this evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Tonight is the Joint Buildings and Grounds and Finance Committee meeting. We're going to begin with finance. So that said, we'll officially call the meeting to order. And may I ask for your stand to pledge for the allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We do have some residence requests this evening. I believe that we have 4. The board provides a time for public comment at committee meetings for residents and taxpayers to bring their thoughts on specific agenda items to the board, but this is not a time for exchange between the board, the administration, and the speaker. We ask that speakers refrain from identifying specific students, staff, and community members by name. Each resident is provided up to 3 minutes to speak at a committee meeting on a topic identified on the meeting agenda. Residents and taxpayers who are interested in making public comments must complete the electronic registration form prior to 3 p.m. On today's meeting. As I stated, we have 4 speakers. We now have 3. Okay. And Mr. Dandridge, may you take charge here and announce our speakers?
Sure. Our first speaker will be Ronnie Jevons, followed by Joseph Marks.
I'm sorry. In light of the fact that we are not voting on the pilot tonight, some of the speakers may wish to be addressing that. So should we just let everyone know that my understanding is we're not voting on the pilot tonight, right?
The administration is asking for 2 more weeks for that vote. Yes.
Oh, just 2 more weeks.
To May 9th is what we were asking for.
I thought we were waiting a whole year.
Dr. Dandridge will address that on item 7, but there is no vote on the agenda for the LA pilot.
Okay, all right.
Of course. Yeah, it's on the agenda.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry. Hi, my name is Ronnie Jevons. I'm a resident of Hempfield and I am the parent of 2 first graders. This is my first time addressing the board. I didn't prepare anything written because I kind of just wanted to talk informally. I came last week and spent about 5 hours reviewing Wit and Wisdom. And I was just really, really jazzed up and excited. It's a really exciting curriculum. And I just wanted to share my enthusiasm about it. My son is a special education student and he is not a reader. Frankly, I'm not sure how much he can read because he flat out refuses to read. So I only know from his teacher what his reading ability is, but he absolutely loves to learn and he adores science. Like science is his thing. He will talk science to you all day. So I really loved this curriculum because it was so much about ideas and content. And I asked if I could borrow some of the books from the table. I was particularly excited about the 4th grade 2nd module. It was just something that I could see my son really jumping into. So also I've heard a lot of parents, have varying opinions on some of the books. So I just wanted to share my excitement about some of these books more specifically. So one of the books is Hatchet, which I think a lot of people are probably familiar with, classic book. It's a novel. But then to go with the same unit is a nonfiction book about mountains. And it explains all about how mountain regions are formed, the climate in mountain regions. It explains about volcanoes, all stuff that my son is super, super into. So you're tying in what happens in Hatchet with the science information. And then this book, if you don't approve this curriculum, I'm going to have to buy this for my child because it's a survival handbook. And again, it ties everything back into this, into all this material, and it's about tying ropes and edible plants. And I just love how this curriculum reaches out to the kids. And also I can just, it requires such a high level of thought from the students. And that's what I want for my kids. It's not just memorizing, it's about their ability to think, their ability to analyze literature. And I'm just super excited. And one of my thoughts while reviewing, I know I'm almost out of time. One of my thoughts while reviewing this was actually, can I come volunteer in the school? Do they take ELA volunteers? Because that's how excited I felt looking over this curriculum. So I just wanted to share that and ask that I hope that the school board will choose to approve this curriculum. Thanks.
Next up is Joseph Marks, who will be followed by Faye Skaya.
And Mr. Boyer is first, and I see him, he's here.
He is not speaking tonight.
Mr. Boyer is not speaking.
He withdrew his
Oh,
request.
okay, all right.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Marks, and I'm speaking as a parent and resident of the Hempfield School District. I will be speaking briefly about the ELA curriculum recommendation that the recent pilot program in our schools has resulted in. First, I wanted to thank those involved in the pilot program and the presentation that was shown during the last school board meeting. I found it very informative, and I thought I had a lot of takeaways. I actually watched it at home. We watched it on TV and everything. So it was a good listen and a lot of information about the curriculum that I didn't already know. I had a few small thoughts that I wanted to share after listening to the presentation and the questions that were presented during the last meeting. First, one of the concerns that was brought up was that Wit and Wisdom does not have a phonics component. It was mentioned in the presentation that Wit and Wisdom can and would be used with all of our existing programs, including phonics, and that they complement each other well. It was also mentioned that these programs are already fully owned by the district, so there's no cost to continue using those. Another concern that was brought up last time was that of cost. As was discussed during the last meeting, a lot of this goes over my head, but much of the cost is covered by ESSER's funding that comes with certain restrictions on how those funds can be used. And one of the ways it can be used is for this new ELA curriculum. Lastly, I would like to speak on mine and my children's personal experiences with the Wit and Wisdom curriculum. My daughter is in the extended day kindergarten class at Centerville Elementary, and her class was one of those that piloted Wit and Wisdom. We have had a great experience with this curriculum, and our daughter has been really excelling this year, particularly in reading. One thing that I wanted to highlight specifically was that her classroom had a long-term substitute in the middle of the year while her teacher was on leave. We saw and heard feedback from the teacher, both teachers, about how it was easy for them to pick right up where they left off, where the other left off, without skipping a beat, and this made the transitions that much easier on our child and her classmates. During the last meeting, it was also highlighted that a child chose to go to the National Air and Space Museum, having been inspired by one of the modules in Wit and Wisdom. And just last week, the Hempfield School District shared on Facebook that a third grade class piloting the curriculum had a STEM lesson with rockets that coordinated with their Wit and Wisdom ELA space unit. I think it's great to see and hear firsthand how well this curriculum is working for students and for teachers. I sincerely hope that the board votes to approve the recommended curriculum, even if it's not tonight, and that in the fall, my daughter will be able to experience another great year with the ELA curriculum. And as I was writing this, I realized that if I forget if it was 6 or 7 year contract, but it would take, if you voted to adopt this curriculum, it would cover my daughter's entire year time at Centerville, because I think it's 6 years if she's in kindergarten now. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Faye Skaya.
Good evening. I have 2 kids in the elementary schools here in Hempfield, and I appreciate and understand the need for an elementary ELA program in our district, and I support getting one. We need a high-quality curriculum that will help our students and teachers and provide consistency across the district. But for the cost we're talking about, we need to make sure we have a program with data-proven results. I'm not convinced we have the data yet that shows Wit and Wisdom should be the way forward for our district. As mentioned during the March committee meeting, the assessment data from both Wit and Wisdom and Savas does not differ greatly from what we currently do. In fact, scores actually went down in 3 grades and stayed the same in 1 grade for the Wit and Wisdom classes. That alone should give us a pause. We've been told Baltimore has had great success with Wit and Wisdom, but the only data available is the first year they implemented it in 2019. And even then, the scores only improved 0.4% to 3.1%. meaning they still only had 16% of third graders scoring in their top 2 levels. If Wit and Wisdom is as dynamic as advertised, why aren't there more results readily available showing it? On the other hand, the Savas study from 2019 showed significant gains. While the sample size was small, it was conducted in 2 schools in 2 different states, and scores actually increased 8 to 10%. So Wit and Wisdom at best, 3.1%, and Savas, 8 to 10% increase. At the January committee meeting, we heard feedback on both ELA programs from many different teachers and literacy coaches. Generally speaking, there was a lot of really positive feedback for both programs. One of the literacy coaches mentioned Wit and Wisdom was a heavy lift, and my view was less of a heavy lift. What are the hidden costs associated with dedicating 2 experienced Hempfield teachers for implementation, such as finding long-term subs or less experienced teachers to replace them? What would the implementation plan be for Savas, since it isn't as much of a heavy lift? The literacy coach also referred to the Savas program as a menu, not a recipe. So could the recipe be chosen for the first year for the ease of implementation and cut down on spin-up time for teachers? Then they could branch out as they got more comfortable. Many positives that have been mentioned about Wit and Wisdom also apply to Savas, such as science of reading, and the teacher, student, and parent surveys were also fairly balanced between the 2 programs. We know that Manheim Township and Elanco are also piloting Savas. Has there been any crosstalk with them about their experience and what their plan for implementation is? Finally, looking at the cost for each program, it appears Savas has a higher price tag. However, both programs may be similar in cost depending on the implementation plan. Were any accommodations and costs made since we are already using their math program for Savas? Are there any efficiencies that can be gained for teachers, parents, and students by using the same company for both math and ELA programs? To summarize, I support a new ELA program, but want to make sure due diligence is accomplished to choose the one that best fits our district needs before investing 1.5 million more of taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
That concludes our remarks for this evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, and we appreciate your remarks and your time. That leads us into our formal Finance Committee meeting. And our first presenters are Mr. Lou Verdelli and Mr. Ken Phillips, who's the Managing Director of the bond program with Raymond James. And Lou has been with us here numerous times, as well as Ken in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer. It's a pleasure for Lou and I to be here. You have some documentation before you, I believe, with respect to the presentation, since we were here about 5-6 weeks ago. So tonight, we're going to give you an update on the market. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we need to be worried about under Act 1, which you're familiar with because we've done many projects here the last 10 plus years when Act 1 has been around, I guess, since 2006. So when you look at the very first page, this is sort of a snapshot of where we are. Currently, the district has a very good rating, AA2, which puts you in a very good state of ratings compared to other districts across the state of Pennsylvania. We have $68 million of outstanding debt, with a lot of it being paid off in the next 9 years, which is good as you're starting to look at planning for the future, which is really what tonight's about, is planning for the future. We have a lot of borrowing capacity. We have the calculation in here, but that's 215 million, which we're not even come close to borrowing that amount of money. But the state says that you could afford under the formula to borrow that if you cared to. Really, the key bullet point here on page 2 is what's Act 1 done. Act 1 has, especially for projects as they get more expensive and they get larger, mainly because of inflation and everything else, you really need to plan ahead. You currently have $7-8 million run rate with respect to your budget. Lou is going to get into some of the spreadsheets later, but you need to not only pay for that amount of money, okay, for the next 9 years or so, you need to layer on top of that the amount of funds needed for the next wave of projects. whatever that amount's gonna be, forget about what the project's gonna be, is Act One nowadays basically makes you a much better planner because the state only gives you a certain index that you need to lead up to. Very good case in point, about 5 years ago, we're sitting with your associates at Penn Manor. They're getting ready to, they're talking about high school. Back then, it was going to be $90 to $100 million. So we said to administration, so, what are you planning on doing? From a phasing in the middle standpoint, they said, well, we think we're going zero this year. And they had just done about 5 years of zero. And we said, well, let's continue this discussion because we're going to run some scenarios for you where you go zero this year. This is what it means if you want to get this thing up and running. Basically, long story short, they scrapped that idea. For 2 straight years, they went max index and max exceptions. That is the only way they could have afforded their high school. But they had to get to a point. It's like the compounding of the dollars you put in place for debt. They had to get in place enough money that when the high school came online, that everything was there because they couldn't play catch up. Okay, and that's the same story we tell to anyone who's looking at a larger project. And most projects today, because of inflation, are larger. And so you need to plan ahead. And so kudos to you for planning for the future, which is what this board does. Okay, and we're going to get into some of those studies. So how you do that is you basically take a look at, okay, this is what we need for the future. Maybe we have some monies we can put in a capital reserve fund. Maybe we can use those to defer the cost of the project. Maybe they can be used to as a slush fund to phase in mills over a period of time. We'll look at those options. But it's something that Act One has made us very good at planning for the future with respect to capital projects. Just like everything else, once you borrow the money, you have 85, you have to spend 85% of it within 3 years. That's the intention. And timeline to put something together is in that 60 to 90 day period. Next illustration. This is for Hatboro Horsham School District. They're a AA1 credit down in Montgomery County. And they had some big projects in 2012-13 and also in 2022-21 where we are now. And this was what they were able to do. The red line represents their Act One index, and the black box is where they went up on an annual basis, mainly to gear up for some of their big projects. And we just completed one this past year. But this is what we use with respect to the rating agencies. The rating agencies want to see, and you have a very good rating, a AA2 rating, which is a very, very credible rating. They want to see how you are going to prepare for the future. Okay. And what is the ability to raise money, whether it's in the budget or it's new dollars coming in line, new assessed valuations, more money from the state. They weigh all that, they put it in a pot, and they come up with your ability to go ahead and pay. Okay. So this is a slide we'll probably end up using with, the rating agencies down the road.
I'm sorry, so this slide is a little confusing because it
Sure.
says sample district.
Yeah.
It says Montgomery County, but it has our initials and
It's
a lot of the taxing
No.
increases look similar to
No.
ours. So
Yeah,
what
sure.
exactly is this?
Sure. This is Hatboro Horsham. It just happens to maybe have your initials,
Okay,
HH.
Hatboro
Okay,
Horsham.
this is Hatboro Horsham School District in Montgomery County. This is just a sample of how they raise millage up close to their index over a period of time because of some large building projects and operational costs, obviously. It's just coincidence that maybe it's the same conditions. Okay, this has nothing to do with
Thank
you.
you.
It's really just an illustration. Thank you, Mr.
I got another question.
Yeah.
So do most districts, i.e. Penn Manor and others, start increasing their taxes before they know what their project is and the amount that it's going to be?
They have a good feel for what the amount's going to be. They do know what a project is, okay? Or they know they're going to do 1 or 2 projects and they know they're going to need X dollars or a minimum of X dollars. And yes, Act One, pretty much, we haven't had a project, I don't think since Act One, that you haven't had to go through some steps that we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because the index only allows you so much a year, as you know.
Understood.
Okay. Sorry for the coincidence of the initials, but that's just a sample. So page 4, this is just an illustration since 2000 of where rates have been. You're well aware of this because we've done financings for new money in that time period. We've also done some very nice refundings in that time period with your approval to save the taxpayers millions of dollars. We hit an all-time low ever of interest rates back in 2020. When you had rates extremely low, you see the points, and then you see them going back up. And that's really what the Federal Reserve has increased their rates, over 450 basis points here since 2022. And they're probably going to go a little higher and then maybe have a plateau here. But rates have come down as of late after hitting a high. So the one thing that is good, and we'll talk about it, is we have a lot of clients doing this as they're starting to prepare for projects. This is the first time in about 20 years where you could actually borrow money and invest that money higher than the cost of your borrowing. We haven't had that in a long time. Rates have been zero, right? We all invest in CDs and you're getting 0.5 or whatever it was. Well, now you're able to get into 4s. It's the same thing if you were to ask administration, and you probably see it on your monthly treasurer's reports, the amount of money you're making on interest earnings is, quite substantial. We haven't had that in a decade plus. So there are some financing things that we're doing with people who have projects coming up. And it's mainly because, one, you're locking in a good rate. We'll take a look at that next slide, even though rates have increased. But more importantly, you have a period of time here where you're going to invest that money at a higher rate. Page 5 represents the blue line is the average since 1993. So even though rates have increased about 150 to 200 basis points, the red line represents where we are today. And if you look at the very beginning of that, you can see that it's what they call an inverted curve, where the rates are actually higher in year 1 than they are really until they get out to about year 13, 14. Okay. If you were to look at short-term rates today, you're earning 4 3/4 probably on your investment earnings on the general fund proceeds that the district has. And the cost of borrowing is less than that. Okay. Finally, before I turn over to Lou, this is just a calculation. Sometimes we get asked the question, what is my borrowing capacity? How much could I legally borrow? So what the state does is they take your last 3 years of revenues. This is just down and dirty. There's some deductions that come out of that. And they come up with an average, in this case, $126 million. They take that times 225%. So legally, you could borrow 215. We've never had anyone close, well, that's not true. Probably 15 years ago, when costs of buildings started going higher, we had some people close to borrowing capacity. But now, with budgets where they are and so on, and someone of your size, it's very rare that someone would come close to their borrowing capacity. But we put this in there just because sometimes you get the question. With that, I'll turn over to Lou and be here for questions.
Thanks, Ken. So I'll pick up on page 7. And we just wanted to quickly review the district's existing debt. Ken was mentioning the amount of debt that you have right now, but this page is what we use and help the business office with when it comes to budgeting for the total debt service payments that you need to make in your budget each year, as well as keeping track of each one of these issues for refinancing opportunities. Ken mentioned we had some good opportunities over the last couple of years when interest rates were at rock bottom. We did those refinancings. District saved a lot of money. So it's on this page that we keep track of all of that. But the really important thing to look at here is the far right column, which is when we add up the payments on all of the existing debt and we look at it each year. What is that amount? You have to have that in your budget. You have to have enough mills in the current budget to be covering that debt service, so that we know if there's any anticipated projects that from column 9, as it looks right now, we need to build on top of that for any additional borrowings. And the nice thing, Ken mentioned that the majority of your debt really pays off pretty rapidly over the next 9 years. So as you go down column 9, you can see this current fiscal year that's about to end, you're at 9 million. Next year, you're at 9 million of debt service, and then there's a little bit of a drop to just under 8 million. And you stay at that rate. And then out in 2033, the debt service drops off quite a bit. So what's good about that is we've always tried to keep your debt relatively short. Helps reduce interest expense. It now has you in a position that if you need to do additional borrowings, we can fit that debt in where those drop-offs occur to minimize how much we go up from this existing $9 million. Obviously, we're trying to keep that amount as small as possible, so it has the littlest budget impact as possible for a large project. So it's really important that we look at that, because what we're going to flip to is if you had projects where you needed to borrow more money and we start to slot in additional borrowings, they're going to sit on top of this, and your budget's going to need to be able to absorb that additional payment. So why don't we flip to page 9?
So little question for you. So based on this top table, if we waited till 2033, we'd probably have enough to fund a big project, and our millage would be high enough because we're going from 8 to 1.6 million. Is that correct?
If you didn't do the project.
Right.
Then.
We'd have to wait till 2033 if we don't. We wouldn't have to increase millage for that probably, or maybe a little bit.
Right, we would be able to, if you did no other borrowings between now and then, and this drop off stayed there, we would be able to do a borrowing there, probably go out 15 years at that run rate, and your debt service would stay as it is today, correct?
Not that we'd want to wait 10 years. It's just
Yep, that's important.
helping people understand. Okay.
Yep, good point. So if we turn to page 9, what we did here was just slot in, assuming that there was a project occurring in the next couple of years and you needed to borrow for it. We slotted in here several borrowings, in this case 4, starting in 2023, to basically show how the debt service would come online and your budget would need to be able to accommodate that additional debt service in addition to what you're already paying on the existing debt. So we have these labeled across the top. A gray column is the 2023, a potential $15 million borrowing. And again, we just slotted these by calendar year to spread them out so that the impact coming on various budgets would be as small as possible. Because certainly if we said, let's borrow all the money at once, then we would have this big payment, and probably you wouldn't be able to get that in to your next budget, assuming a SAL index of 3 or 4% like we've seen recently. So as the 23 borrowing would come online, you can see that you would have a new payment starting next year of about $442,000. So that gets carried over to the far right to column 7. And then as each one of those additional borrowings come online in 24 and in 25 and in 26, their payments, they all accumulate. So as we go down column 7, where the payment right now, the net debt service payment is about 8.2 million. If you borrowed according to that plan, you can see that your run rate, the debt service that you would eventually have to be able to pay in your annual budget, gets up to about 14 million. So that's really, as what Ken was describing, the importance of planning when you have a restriction like Act 1 puts on you, that you can only increase your taxes so much to cover all of the costs in your annual budget, that if just the debt service amount needs to increase substantially, whether it's from 8 million to 14 or 8 to 12, depending on your project and how much money you borrow, we still have to figure out how we get that built into the budget. And so on the following page 10, we reviewed this with you when we were here in February. We added one more column because a couple of you had some questions about what we were showing equated to as a percentage in terms of a tax increase to support this debt service. But on page 10, The left side of the page, columns 1 through 7 is basically what we were just looking at. And then columns 8 through 14 is showing the equivalent of the mills that you have in place now in your budget, how much we would have to increase them to cover and get up to a higher run rate like 14 million in this one example that we gave you. You might remember we looked at column 10 and we said, for example, if you raised your millage by a 0.3 mils each of the next 4 years, you would have enough revenue coming in to cover this new debt service. And the question came up was, well, what type of percent increase is that? So we added column 12 for you. And you can see there that that's about a 1.74% increase in the upcoming budget if you were going to follow a plan like this to cover this proposed borrowing plan. And that would then mean there would be another 1.7 the following year percent increase, 1.68% increase, and that's just to cover the debt service. Ken mentioned also a little bit at the beginning that if you were following this plan, what many districts do is the money that's left over, because you haven't borrowed all of it yet, but if you raised your taxes a little bit to generate more revenue, you're going to have some left over, and that's column 14. So just in our first year example, if you did that tax increase and you only borrowed 15 million in 2023, you would have about $1 million of excess funds that you could put into the capital reserve, that you could reserve to eventually pay for a project. And what people typically do is as they accumulate that money, we can reduce one of the final borrowings so you don't have to borrow as much as you get towards the end of the project.
The other thing that we use, this does not take into consideration at all any interest earnings on the borrowings. Okay, but which today would be substantial. In the last decade and a half, it's been basically zero. So again, column 6, the last borrowing where it says, you know, we need 48,175. Depending how you utilize that column 15, depending how you utilize interest earnings, that could be something less. And who knows the cost of the project, right? It could be higher, it could be lower based on this. But that's not another conservative feature that's on the budget.
And that's assuming we're borrowing the whole 150 million.
Well, yes, I mean, that's, and who knows what the cost of the projects, that was the number that we used for this illustration.
Yeah, but
100 or that's entirely obviously the cost.
but that makes a big difference on this percentage increase every year.
Yeah. Right. If the amount that, if your project is substantially lower and the borrowing's lower, then all these numbers would be lower.
Well, a lot of our discussions about been hypothetical about what our project would cost, but not hypothetical about how much we were actually going to borrow. So the number you're hearing, 150 million, would be maybe a worst case scenario on a new school. But if we're taking this strategy, be putting whatever million in cap reserve every year, obviously with the money we already have, there's a good chance we're not borrowing 150 million, even if the project was 150.
Right.
Correct.
So I'm not really saying it to you guys. I'm kind of saying it to our group.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Sure.
So these percentages are over and above to balance the budget. In other words, if you balance the budget, then another 1.74% above what you need to balance the budget.
Well,
that
that's
correct?
really just to cover this debt
Yes,
service.
yeah.
Not your other parts of the. budget.
Understood,
Yeah,
understood.
just this debt service.
What's additional increase to be able to afford
Yes.
the bond payment for the project?
Yep.
I did have a question, the previous page. You went up. Series 2023 was 3.12, then 3.49, then 4.36. Do you think the bond rate's gonna keep going up?
That's really the reflection, Mr. Mayor, if you look at the length of each one of those issues.
Okay, that's about length,
Yeah,
okay.
so the longer issue with most of the principal, like if you look at column 6.
I see,
2026, most of the bonds in the last few years, so they're.
Okay.
Yeah.
gotcha.
We assume today's rates for each one of those
Okay.
columns.
I got you.
Yep, but that's a good observation. And obviously, we can run all of these numbers on a different amount. This was the original amount that Mr. Brooks asked us to come to you in February with as an example. If there's a different number you want to see as an example, we can refresh all of these. But I think that was just what we were asked to bring and show you as one scenario.
And what some schools do, Mr. Bart, is since you may not have the number yet. And if you wanted to get numbers, if you wanted to start the process in this coming budget year. You go up to 0.3. Let's say that the project ends up being 125. You make the adjustments later on down the road. So they get started because you know you need at least 30 million, right? And so they get it in place early and they just take it out at the end. Let's say at the end you have $10 million that we're going to throw in class borrowing, and let's say the project was 130, now we only need 120. All that gets calculated then in the 26, 27, instead of being 0.3, maybe it's 0.2. And then that percentage is 1.3 instead of 1.6.
And I think one of just the important things when we were first here talking about kind of borrowing plans and basic rules. Obviously, one of the most basic rules is you have to have a project and know what your project is before we would say, well, even though we can make arbitrage on a $15 million borrowing and you can borrow at 3.5 and invest at 4.5, that's a great plan. The bottom line is we want to make sure that you really have a project and a rough timeline on it. So while we have that one slotted in there for 2023, if your decision-making process isn't far enough along to do that, of course, we wouldn't recommend you do that. But I think when we were here in February, we talked a little bit about the small issuer exception that the IRS does let you, if you only do 15 million in a calendar year, you're allowed to generate interest earnings. And the more interest earnings and money you can build, it's less you have to borrow, it's less you have to ask the taxpayers for. So we're just doing our job to tell you that for the first time in 15 years, it's a real opportunity to do these types of planned borrowings and take advantage of some of the rules that the IRS actually lets you take advantage of.
General question, I don't know if it's for you or for Karen and Mike. Our fund balances and our reserves, are they allowed to be invested in money market and accrue interest? The reserves that we have,
Yes.
they are. I assume they are earning interest?
They are.
Yes.
So, yeah, so we've got two, actually, we're just getting ready
Can
to.
you get
Yeah,
closer?
I'm
I can't
sorry.
hear you.
Yeah, we actually have them invested in short-term CDs.
Okay.
We're actually getting close to 5% on those.
Okay,
We just got some that are maturing that we're looking at what we're going to do with those coming up.
I assume that interest was included in our recent budget estimates?
yeah.
Okay,
And that gets into, as we plan these types of projects and financings, we start talking about, it's better to keep your cash because there's no restrictions on your earnings, where these types of borrowings have restrictions.
Right.
Keep your cash till the end of a project because you can generate as much interest as you want and then apply it towards the project when we're in an interest rate environment like we are. 3 years ago, when interest rates were 0, it didn't matter. And so you would put your cash in up front. But in this environment, when you have opportunities to generate 5% interest on your reserve funds, you want to keep those as long as you can.
So as a strategy, it may make sense to do these borrowing plans slightly earlier in our projection stage or building process stage when the investment environment is correct, so that we can actually grow the funds through interest accumulation to help pay for part of the project and therefore defer costs.
That's right.
Thank you.
Which, again, it's been 15 years since we've talked
Correct.
about these
It's been a long
strategies
time.
with people.
so you're actually saying right now, if we borrow some money this first year, even though we don't know what our project is, we'll gain more interest than we are paying interest.
Right.
Correct.
And that's really derived from your credit rating. The higher your credit rating is, so right, there's an inverse relationship to your borrowing costs. Higher the rating, lower your interest rate. So as a highly rated district, you can borrow right now at probably an interest rate on the way we structured that first issue, 2.75 or 3%.
Right.
Given how interest rates have come down. And if you can earn 4.5 or 5, it's a nice opportunity.
That also might kind of mean that it's good to borrow more than add additional other than making the bond payment, add additional taxes to put money in reserves. Borrowing may make some more sense than increasing our taxes to put additional money into reserves.
The only thing you have to be careful there is getting back to making sure you're building budget capacity for when those other
Understood.
borrowings eventually come
Understood.
online.
That's correct. And that's why you need those incremental increases in your millage rate to support that funding mechanism and maintain a high credit capability.
Page 10 shows that again, it gets back to the compounding side. If you don't put anything in 23, 24,
Can you use the microphone, please? Thank you. And the microphone's not up as loud tonight. Seems hard to hear.
page 10 shows the compounding effect, Mr. Mauer.
Yes,
It shows
thank you.
that you need to get, in this illustration over 4 years, you need to get to 1.2 equivalent mills. Maybe that's money in the budget. Maybe that's, all new mills. If you don't go the first year, but still want to keep the timeline of the project, well, now you're basically going to go 0.4, 0.4, 0.4. You need to get there eventually, because as Lou said, you need to get from roughly 8 million net debt service after reimbursement to 14 million once the project is online,
That's correct.
assuming the cost of the project that we're assuming tonight.
What question, how does inflation correlate with loan interest rate and, investment interest rate? Is there any correlation between those three?
Not necessarily, because if we think about during COVID, we had our lowest borrowing costs, interest rates that we had ever seen, as the chart showed. There was no inflation at that point, right? The economy was like it had been the last 10 years. Inflation was 1 or 2% per year. We were all just moving along. But here you have the environment we've been in the last year where the inflation rate has been as high as 8-9%, but interest rates moved up a little bit. They're at 3 or 4%. So here we are in an environment where inflation is much, much higher than the borrowing rate. Whereas just a couple of years ago, inflation was lower than the borrowing rate.
So COVID was kind of an anomaly, but the previous 10, 15 years, where did inflation and bond interest go? Did they correlate? Was the bond interest higher than inflation, lower than inflation, equal, or a wash?
I think if we look at the interest rate chart, just the history back on page 4. So the last 10 years, rates were relatively pretty between a band of maybe 2 and 4% over that time frame. I think inflation during that time was probably even less than that. We really had a long run of 1 and 2%, very little inflation in the economy. People kind of wondered what was going on and said, well, we're all just getting more efficient at our jobs. And that was the explanation why there was no inflation. So I think the last 10 years, inflation was low and interest rates were relatively low.
Okay. So it's can be up and down.
Yeah. And I would just clarify to make sure you understood that the limit on the ability to keep any arbitrage that you earn, which is the interest rate above your borrowing rate, it's 15 million per calendar year. So I know you said something about borrowing as much. The IRS gives school districts only that $15 million limit. They call it a small issuer, that you're only issuing 15 million in a calendar year. So if you wanted to take advantage of that, the max that you can do to keep unlimited amounts of your interest earnings is 15 million per calendar year, which is why that's what we showed for 23.
I don't think we're anything close to that, are we? Okay.
Lou, can you just remind everyone, just maybe we talked about it last time, just the time frame from a borrowing standpoint? I know you referenced, the possibility of if something was to occur this year versus next calendar year, the amount of time it takes to do that.
Sure. Yeah, from the time you would say, we'd like to borrow X amount, go do it. We really need a full 60 days until we would be able to come back and have the legal resolution for you to approve incurring the debt. And then we would work with the business office to get your credit rating updated, and the offering statement that goes out to investors has to have all the information updated. And then we lock in an interest rate, have to send everything to Harrisburg for some approvals. So it's really at a minimum 60 days till we could complete it from the time you would say go.
Thank you.
And those rules per calendar year, the issue actually has to close in the calendar year. So if we talked about 15 million at the end of the year, that would mean the approval to move forward have to happen in September, October, so that we could do all those things and close on December 30th. So that it landed in the calendar year.
Thank you.
Okay. And we'd be happy to update any of these scenarios if you need to see a different amount.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Thank you to Raymond James for your time and your energy and your continued financial acumen.
You're
We
welcome.
appreciate it.
Nice evening.
You as well. Thanks. All right, the next item open for discussion this evening is our budget discussion, and Mrs. Hall, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, you can go to the next slide, Doug. So a lot of this is what you saw at the earlier board meeting.
Mrs. Hall, can you use the microphone, please?
I'm trying to. Eating it. I'm just waiting. Doug, next slide. Thank you. A lot of it is the same as what you saw earlier in the month, except for we have some updated numbers from the county, and we've had some nice natural growth, which has increased our revenues by almost $1 million. So that number is updated, which has decreased our deficit for the year to 2.7 million. So at this point, if we were to balance the budget with a tax increase, it would be 3.1%. Just to give you an update of where we were at 4 going into the last meeting. Next slide.
This again assumes no
Sure.
zero funding from the state.
Zero additional funding. from the
Funding,
state,
yeah.
Right, flat funding. Another slide that you've seen that our adjusted Act-1 index is 4.8%, which is roughly $4.2 million in revenue. And right out of the gate, we were looking at a $5 million increase to cap reserve. We have 1.29 million that we're committed to in the HEA agreement, and an additional 50,000 in debt service. So right out of the gate, we were looking at a deficit, which we've worked really hard to reduce our expenses to try to minimize that as much as possible. Next slide. We've seen these before as well. If we were looking at a tax increase, what that would mean on the average taxpayer based on the median assessed value. Next slide. Again, our tax increase history against the Act-1 index. And this was, I believe, requested at the last meeting, is where we sat amongst the county in terms of millage rate. We are basically dead center currently in our millage rate. Just another overview of our expenditures, actual 23 budget, 24 budget. And a lot of the increase in this budget comes from the cap reserve, the $5 million. Next. Just a breakdown of our expenditures. While we've skinny down a lot of our expenditures, there's a lot of areas that we don't really have control over. Transportation, debt service, some of the special education, those areas we can't cut. We did any of the, typically discretionary areas we have cut down, and that includes some salary and benefits by taking a hard look at our head count as well. Next slide. Just a recap of the fund balance, which you've seen. Next slide is our general fund balance. just so you have an idea of where we sit with that prior to adding additional in next year's budget. And then this just revisits, where we are today. So in terms of, sorry, Doug, next slide. Next steps, it's really discussing what
Could you-
the
could you
tax
back a
recommendation is
slide?
going to be.
You back, so the deficit is what, 27?
27,
66?
34.
Okay, so about almost a million better than
Yes,
previous.
yep, close to $1 million. Mhm.
And that was a direct result of the increased local county assessment
Yes,
data. It was almost $1 million increase. If you compare this to the funds and schedule we had prepared at the last board meeting, that's where the difference is. And that's why the 142,330,000 is highlighted in bold. Mr. Keener.
So if I'm understanding this, we can balance the budget. We can balance the budget, assuming no increase in state funding with a 3.1% taxing.
yes,
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's with 5 million capital reserve.
That is with the 5 million capital reserve.
Fund.
Yep.
Right.
So,
which also takes in consideration, what the Raymond James people were talking about phasing in your millage.
I'm
So
sorry.
I said it also does exactly what they've recommended, the Lou Verdelli saying to phase in your millage. That does that by putting the 5 million in cap reserve,
I
it takes care of
what
that.
they're saying most of the time, so
Okay.
I read through the slides.
So if we were to go to a 2% tax increase, how much would go into capital reserve instead of 5 million?
Whatever the difference is.
So each percentage is about 886,000, so a little over 4, like a 4.1
So we
million.
still get 4 million
You would,
cap reserve.
And that's assuming nothing from the state,
nothing additional, correct?
which is a very conservative assumption.
Correct. Again, I would reiterate what Bound Council was sending us the message on is that you have to continue to make progress on supporting that millage rate moving forward in order to support future debt. Now, if you're going to postpone it, all you do is postpone the bill to later and require a larger increase to our taxpayers.
They mentioned increasing the tax millage as building steps to make a robust platform
Agreed.
for the future thing. They never once mentioned what the millage should be at this point in time based on our current financial situation.
Well, it's calculated in there, Dylan. It's not in there as a percent of budget increase. It's in there as a percent of millage increase.
Right, but the percent of millage that they had in that program was assuming above what you needed to stay solvent as we are. We're already at a surplus with no addition. We're already at a surplus. So it's a different, if we assumed no increase at all on their things, they're only asking us to increase by like 1.7%. They're saying 1.7 above what we need to increase for our current bills.
Not percent of budget, percent of the millage rate.
No,
They're
that's what I'm saying.
Two different things.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay.
I think they did. That one chart they showed, I think, they made it equivalent to the additional tax increase, right?
Mhm.
Okay,
That's
all
what I'm
right.
saying.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
Dylan has it right. I just want to make sure everyone else understands it.
the reality is, if we didn't have the 5 million going to cap reserve, we'd have a surplus this year with no tax increase.
Correct.
Correct.
Right, and then
So-
looking down the road, we're gonna be looking at a fiscal cliff situation. We've
Correct.
got to plan ahead,
Why would we be looking at a fiscal cliff?
because we have about $250 million worth of capital needs coming down the pipe over the next 20 years.
That's correct, which are not covered. And we know we have just $11 million that we plan to spend this year. We don't even barely have that in cap reserve in total.
I thought we have from those slides about 29 million in cap reserve, including the bond money.
No, that's not
11 million.
That's correct.
It's 11.
It's page, where's her?
Which is right,
11.
11. The general,
This is an easy way to look at it. If you're going to do a big project, regardless of what the cost is, we know we're going to do one. We will not save enough money to overpay for that project. And either way, you look at the cost of a project, it will cost us the same amount. From the standpoint of if a project is $100 million, we're going to have to pay $100 million at some point. If you can save and you can plan ahead of time, you will always help the taxpayers and the community financially in the long run.
not necessarily. If you look at inflation and you do a net present value, look at the cost of a capital job, a capital like the high school. And if you look at the discount rate because of inflation, it could actually cost the public, cost us more, depending on how bad inflation is because of the time value of money.
You
I just-
are misinterpreting the use of net present value with cost of capital, Charles. When you analyze the financial results here. Justin, if you have any other words of wisdom here.
No, that's
Step up.
accurate. At the end of the day, you just kick the can down the road and you end up costing the taxpayers more if you don't plan appropriately. In the current borrowing environment that we're in, it does pay to borrow the money. For example, the 15 million, when we can invest it for 4 to 5% and we're borrowing it at 2%. There's a return on investment. Now, that's a side note to the fact that that's just money that we can put forth towards a bigger project. But if we can save dollars over the course of time, what ends up happening is at the end of the life of that loan, you can choose to pay that off. And $11 million, when we're looking at the size of project that Hempfield is considering and needs to consider, is a drop in the bucket. I would strongly recommend we take a planning approach, because in the end, you will pay for that project either way. There's no getting out of paying what's going to cost to do the project. You can either choose to just kick that can down the road, or you can choose to plan appropriately. And in the end, save money. I've never been part of a project where not saving money, or I'm sorry, where saving money has hurt the taxpayers in the long run. I'm not saying this derogatory, but it's short-sighted not to plan.
Which taxpayers specifically? That's what I'd like to get into.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Ward.
Which taxpayers I'd like to.
Your community taxpayers.
Right, so 70% of our community don't have children. And of that 70%, roughly 50% of them are over the age of 65 years old on a fixed income. And many of those potentially won't even be alive to see this school. But we're asking them, 50% of them, to invest in this school now.
That's been the case for years, where you have the turnover. So for example, right now I have no children in the school district. I could say, well, it doesn't benefit me. And if I can help delay this project long enough, maybe I won't have to help pay for it. And in the end, my children and grandchildren are going to pay for it. Somebody's going to pay for it. So I understand your point, Mr. Bard. However, I would just suggest that this is the cycle of life.
I would like to say that Lancaster is a landing spot for many people from all over the country as being one of the most desirable places to live, based on being close to the health campus and those things. They're not necessarily third generation, fourth generation families anymore that are saying they're looking out for their grandchildren and great grandchildren. They're people that came here and chose to come here because the cost of living is very good versus their fixed income. I just had a conversation with my mother-in-law, who's 76 years old. She lives in Village Green, age 55 and above neighborhood. I think there's 265 homes in there. Of that, the majority of them are over 70 years old. $40 a year to them right now, when they may only live 5 more years, and they're thinking about a school, they're not worried about that. They're worrying about getting through this month. So I'm not proposing and that we do not raise taxes. I want you to understand that.
I mean, I think, Mr. Barb, I think your sentiments are laudable and
Did I finish talking?
I thought you were finished.
No, sir.
My apologies.
Thank you. My point was, I was going to say that I'm not proposing to have no increase. I think that 2% would be a lot more reasonable than 3% and a lot of reasons. Because a 2% is still taking a step up. It's a net of 5.5% over 2 years. We still potentially put 5 in cap reserve versus maybe 6 in cap reserve. And we'll still be looking potentially at tax increase the following year. 3%, I just think is extremely aggressive at this point in time with everything going on. That's my opinion.
Good,
Thank
good.
you.
Karen, can you help me understand the two different slides? We have general fund, 24 million, and it says it has 11 million assigned for cap reserve, and then we have two other funds for 9.7 and 8.7 million. Am I duplicating, or I want to try to understand the total capital reserve? There's two different slides. One has two line items for capital reserve, one 9.796 and one 8.748. And then the next slide, next page has a general fund balance, which has 11.2 million. Are they not all capital reserve? Am I doubling up?
So we should really look at the second slide of the two. So you have that number. Some of these are already committed. So
When you say
cap
committed,
projects. Right, so some are already bond proceeds that are set for cap projects that we're spending through. It's not part of the cap reserve.
but have we spent them
You
yet?
have to. You only
Okay.
get so much time to spend a
Legally, we
bond.
have to.
You have 3 years.
We're out of clock. We have 3 years to
Yeah.
do it.
That was the one that was a 10 million dollar
That's
bond.
correct.
Okay. And those projects are already designated for that
Right,
money.
and those are going,
Correct.
these are the balances as of 6/30/22. So we're
Okay.
working against those right now.
So I do want to still disagree, with Mr. Walden, with Mr. Mauer. If you look at the time value money, whether you call it net present value, whatever you call it, and we tax our taxpayers 3, 4, 5 years at a couple percent more per year. And then if you look at a loan, a bond loan for an extended 15 years or whatever, and you look at the impact of inflation, sometimes it could be a wash, because the money that you're taxing the taxpayers now, those dollars are worth a lot more than 10, 15, 20 years from now. So if you look, the true cost of a building project is looking at the net present value or the cost of a project in current dollars. And if you look at that, you might be surprised, especially with inflation higher, that taking that money up front from the taxpayers, that money's worth a lot more. So you borrow a little bit longer, okay? It can be a wash to where you're not really getting that big as advantage as you're talking about.
That is only true in an environment where interest rates outpace the cost of capital, the interest you can earn. That's the only time.
No, it's inflation can impact that. Inflation is going to impact it too.
No, inflation is an additive to the net present value of money. So it means it's worth less
Right.
tomorrow than it is today.
Right, and that can impact if you calculate the net present value of a project, including the loans and the taxes that you withdrew. You look at different options. One, you don't take as much tax out or little tax out and you borrow more. It can be a wash.
No, you're not seeing the picture in terms of the total cost of a project. The cost of a project is the cost of a project. It needs to be paid for. You're assuming that the net present value is going to pay for the project. That's not entirely the case.
But that's the effective cost in current
It
dollars.
isn't.
No, I guess we have to disagree on that one.
So, and I'd like to address Mr. Barley. I apologize. There was a long pause and I thought you were done talking. If you were not, I apologize. I think your sentiments about people without children in the district, our senior population, I respect those opinions. But we are going to spend this money regardless, okay? Hempfield is going to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the coming decades on capital needs. No one in this board, no one in this community disputes that.
I do. I'm not sure that's a correct statement. We don't know that yet.
mean,
You say hundreds of millions of dollars.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, you've seen the same reports that I have. The conservative approach is 150 million, the high end approach is 250 million.
But we haven't gone through the feasibility study and the analysis. We don't even know what our project number is. And I think to go ahead and start tacking that money away when we don't know what the project's gonna be is irresponsible.
Do you see a scenario worth less than $150 million? If so, right, I'd like.
Absolutely. We don't know. We don't know what to buy. We might do a renovation of the high school.
Okay, and the renovation, I think, was what, 90 million? Right?
We don't
Renovation?
know.
But that doesn't mean you sit pat, Charles.
And
Ms. Mayor.
I'm okay. If we have a 2% tax increase, we're still slugging 4 million in the cap reserve, which is probably, that's still a lot of money, okay? And it's still giving us what Dylan said, it's giving us more than that 1.73% that we need. That's
I mean,
already
we've all
doing
seen-
more than he's asking in the first year.
We've seen the models, and if we start this plan and we commit to it, and we make good, sound decisions about what we spend, and not spend like crazy, not building palatial school buildings, being sensible of what we spend, this district is gonna be in better financial shape than any district in the Commonwealth in 10, 15 years from now.
I
But we've
don't.
got to start planning that.
So you're talking about your idea to get us completely out of debt? As you've talked about in previous meetings?
If you run the plan out, that's what will happen.
It's not gonna happen. It's just, that's not practical.
That's a pipe dream.
It's not gonna, that's a pipe dream.
And
I also want
what I was
to,
saying, I'm sorry.
I interrupted
I'm
you.
not finished. Thank
Yes.
you. The, back to Mr. Bard's point, the community, and people have different opinions, people have different level of investment in the schools. I mean, as you well know, I don't have children in the district. And I'm fine with making my commitment to the future of this district. I'm fine with investing in the future, and I'm especially fine with putting a long-term plan in place that's going to ultimately save everyone money. And I don't want to be short-sighted. I don't want to trade a 1% win this year over a much larger cost down the road for our children and grandchildren.
I don't think a percent going from 3 down to 2% is going to bring us on a fiscal cliff. And again, we're still putting 4 million in capital reserve versus 5 million.
probably 5 million,
What's that?
probably.
5 million in reality. So, and it's not just the taxpayers that don't have children. I'm guarantee you the taxpayers that have children, they're being hit with incredible inflation now. So, if we can keep our tax increase down, I'm not saying have no tax increase or one, but I think 2% is a lot more reasonable than going 3.5.
I disagree. I think, I'm glad that you brought up the point about inflation. Inflation this year is going to be what? 5-6% by year end. We can transform our approach to capital spending and keep the tax increase at half the rate of inflation. That's a big win. That's a huge win. Half the rate of inflation and building a sound financial future for this district. I'll take that every day.
And I would just add to this conversation that we've already agreed that we need a project. There's no way with any tax increase, we're going to exceed what we're going to spend. So to your point, Mr. Maris, I don't think we need a full-blown project to make wise decisions here. The second point I'd like to make is that at the end of the day, if we decide we're going to raise taxes now, it truly will in the end pay for itself for the taxpayers. And we can always peel back on the tax increase. So for example, if we would do a 3% this year versus a 2%, and we find in 2 to 3 years that we're in a financial state that is solid, it is a whole lot easier to back off of that than to go up to index and chase those dollars. We're not going to have too much money for the projects that needed. There's no risk of having too many dollars. None. But it's a whole lot easier to leave the next board or whoever comes after us a decision to say, you know what? They put us in such a good spot. We can do 1, 1.5, or go a 0. I'd rather be able to leave the district in that type of position and set us up for success on the front end than to be putting them in a position where they might have to make some difficult decisions. I don't think, as much as we talk about the difficulties and the challenges for everyone financially, those challenges are not going to go away. They've existed for many years. They'll continue to exist. So I don't think we can put stake in saying that those challenges are just here today and inflation is only here now, and those challenges are going to go away. I don't see that happening. So I would just suggest we do the right thing and plan it and maybe push the taxes closer to the 3% range. At the end of the day, if we have extra, we can put that aside and it will help future boards maybe be able to go 0 or 1% or whatever that looks like.
I still think from 2 to 3%, it's not going to make a significant difference in the big picture with a new project. So why overburden the taxpayers earlier than later?
As I've listened to all this, as I understand, the 3% will mean we will not have, we'll meet our budget.
Correct.
Correct.
With 5 million in cap reserve.
With Cal,
Right. And we have had discussions about and had agreed that the 5
that was necessary.
was necessary in order to set, keep our credit rating, to put us in a good position when it comes time to finance, borrow money for all of these projects that we've been talking about for, I've been on the board for 5 years now. We've been talking about, to my knowledge, 5 years. Now, I am well into my retirement years. I don't have any children in the district anymore. I actually only had, out of my 5 children, 2 graduate from the district who spent a significant amount of time in our schools. We moved to this district because of the schools when we first came over 20 years ago. And I've looked at it every year and we're on a fixed income. And I look at this final price and it's $68 a year for, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, $68 a year for a 2% increase per household. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's assuming your house is assessed at 198 million,
196,000.
196, whatever. That's the assumption.
Okay, so those are the numbers that we talk about. So it's 102 for 3%. Thank you. So that's a $34 difference. Now, maybe I'm making this too simple. I probably am, but I believe in public school education. That's why many times my kids have gone to public school. Many times they haven't because of where we have lived. You can't send your kids to public school when you live out of the country. It's not possible. I am in agreement that we need to do 3%. My husband cringes every time I say we need a tax increase. I think it's an important, as a community member who is not going to be here for a long, long time, to invest in the future so that our children coming up and our grandchildren, and even beyond that, we're setting the stage for them to still come, have good facilities, have good labs, ventilation in the chemistry lab, which I understand needs repair. All of those things. I don't feel like that's a burden for me or too much to ask to do that. I'm not thrilled about it. I'm not thrilled about inflation or any of that other stuff. So from a personal viewpoint, as a member of the board and as a retired member of the board who's been retired for over 10 years, I'm okay with the 3%. I think it's been coming down for a long time. We've done 0% at least 1 year. We've done 1%. We've been very, very conscientious for our taxpayers, for our community. We're taxpayers. And I think that looking down the road for what's coming up, and we've always talked about 110 million, and that was over 5 years ago, about how much a high school is going to cost. We don't know if we're going to renovate or build, but we know it's going to be over $100 million. So I'm in favor of the 3%.
Dylan, you were gonna say
I
something?
just want to clarify, the bond council did not say we need to put 5 million in cap reserve to keep our bond rating, Ms. Johnson. What they said is we need the steady tax increases to build a robust base for us to keep our bond rating. Has nothing to do about how much money we put in cap reserve, zero to do with it, actually.
I'm not sure that's what I meant or what I said.
I just want to point out in case you're misunderstanding that. The other thing I want to point out is if we do the 3% raise, we now are the third highest taxed school district in the county, with the only two being above us. Yes, it is.
Maybe I'm looking at different numbers, but that would take us to 17.7756 for.
I apologize.
Yeah,
You're
that
right.
assumes that no one else increases.
No, assume no other
I
increase.
understand.
Do you have that, Karen, do you have the chart with the millages for all the school districts, Lancaster County?
Right here.
That's where I'm at. Yeah.
And don't you have it? You have a hard copy?
3%, assuming that no one else increases taxes, which I would find highly doubtful, would move us from our current position to in between LS and Penn Manor. Assuming that they don't increase taxes at all, my hunch is that 3% leaves us right where we are.
I believe you're correct, Mr. Keener. I did the math before I came.
Yeah.
A 3% increase would not even have us match Penn Manor with a 0% increase. And we know that that's not going to happen.
Well,
And anything less than 2%, we might flip places with Lampeter Strasburg, but that's highly unlikely.
I think this goes without saying, but this statement is more for the community and the public that probably is sitting here saying, I don't want to pay any more for taxes. The one thing I can tell you that the board has asked of this administration and will continue to ask and expect is that we look at every opportunity to, what I would say, manage our expenses, and managing our expenses has limitations to what that looks like as far as, what we can control and what we can't control. And we've charged them with that, and that charge will remain. So I don't want anybody to leave here believing that the fiscal responsibility that's expected behind the scenes is not happening, and we're just raising taxes just to cover loose spending, for lack of a better way of putting it. That's not the case at all. And so I think it's important that people understand this board expects wise spending and non-mission critical items. We're looking at everything from what does it look like to have a class size? Are we running programs we should be running? All those things need to be evaluated. And I'm being very transparent when I say that, but this is not getting anyone off the hook when it comes to being fiscally responsible.
Correct. And I would point out that the prior chart with the tax rate increase, last year we raised taxes 3.5% from prior year during COVID of 2%, knowing full well we had expense increases that went well beyond that tax increase.
the wit wisdom, is that in the budget here?
There is money for an ELA program. So
There's about 1.5 million in the
Yep.
budget for whatever.
and 500,000 of that is.
If we decide not to approve that, does that change the budget?
I have to interject here. We have to buy new ELA curriculum. And that amount is set aside, was an approximate amount. And Savas and Wit and Wisdom have different costs associated with it. And it could have been any curriculum program.
What if
That's how much it costs.
we choose another option? It's still gonna be 1.5 million?
On average, yes. Will it exactly be that? No. But prudence says planning, you put an average amount, like if you buy, I don't know what the current price of a hardback of a high school book is, but back when I was ordering it, it was $75 to $120 per book. That was pre-ebooks. So we always had to plan for the high number even though the book we bought would cost less. So we have a 6-year cycle for our curriculums. ELA, our curriculum director and our administration has said it's time. We've examined and we've already put it in the budget. And so I don't think that's, can we say? Yeah.
And that cost is ending up being amortized in terms of the life of the program over 5 years. We have to make the upfront expenditure to acquire it because it's software by nature. And that's the way the rules of engagement work. But that cost in terms of practice is actually amortized over 5 years. Additional discussion,
I guess I look at,
comments.
I guess I'd look at something even more short term. When we were looking at the final budget expenditures, our salaries went up by $2.5 million. Revenue, some of that is the ESSER funds, and that's shown in the revenue too. But starting next year, that $800,000 is still going to be there in the budget amount.
Which is
but
why I made sure that
revenue
it goes
is
in this
not
year so
going
you
to
can see
be
that.
there. And
Yep.
next year we do negotiate with the teachers. So I'm to the point, just simply for that, I think we have to do something. Because if we do nothing, yes, we would put $2 million.
Yeah, I don't think anybody argued
Okay.
about doing something.
Yeah, but I'm just even for that point, just to do something because of the fact that we are.
But money in cap reserve doesn't help with that.
I know that, but the thing is, I'm not even, to be honest, depending on how contract negotiations go and things, I'm not sure we're going to continuously be able to put $5 million away. No matter what, we're stuck at going to index. I mean, if you think about it, one of the first slides is up there. If we'd have went to 4.8%, that's $4.2 million. Well, more than half of it's just taken up with salaries with it. So, there's some concerns with that going forward. And salaries again are our biggest.
72% of our total expenditures in terms of salaries and benefits.
And I also, and I said this at the board meeting, while I wouldn't want to put in the $1.5 million that was in the governor's budget, I don't think it's unreasonable to figure out, put something in there that we're going to get from the state, even if it's $500,000.
Related to that, Mr. Bremersky, is it not true that we put money in for salaries and wages and we end up not paying all that because we get people leaving or we don't refill positions quickly? Is there some truth to that? And is there some significant monetary impact on that?
This is all you want to talk
I
about
got
that
this
since
one.
we just spoke about it.
Yeah, so while we do have vacancies, we do have to have those positions filled. So we are using subs, we're using agencies like SOS and Ames to fill our custodial. So we are spending that money, it's just being spent in a different way. So the money that's allocated for salaries is still being spent, but some of it on professional contracted services. So, we're coming in pretty close to the budget this year, even though we've had some vacancies sit open. So we've had to fill them other ways.
I guess I'm thinking back to COVID where there was a big shortfall. That's not the case anymore.
During COVID, you didn't need subs because
Yeah.
during the shutdown, everyone was
Understood.
paid and that was very predictable, right? Everyone who was on payroll that date was paid for the rest of that school year.
But as we looked at how we did this past year with salaries and wages, are we going to come pretty close to what we projected?
Like we're coming right on budget right
Okay,
now.
thank you.
In fairness to Mr. Bard and Mr. Maris, if we would consider less than 3%, do I think we're going to be fine? Absolutely. Do I think we're going to put the district in a bad spot? No. Do I think it's going to help us to pay the price up front and increase taxes a little more at the beginning of these projects and put more away? I do. Do I think we're going to come in ahead of budget based on the potential revenue that we haven't seen yet or could see? I do. I tend to be conservative, especially when I know that we have a big project coming and I know that we can put those dollars away and it can help in the long run to lessen the impact on the taxpayers or the cliff when it comes to a large project. So I still stand by the fact that I believe 3% is the right place to be. However, I would say it's not going to cripple us if we ended up at a 2.
And just one other thing, I went back and found the big feasibility study thing from before, and the bigger buildings, high school obviously is number one, and then you have LMS and LPC they've never been renovated. So if you just look at those three, and they had given sample ranges for in the high school, this was just to do basically put a new roof on and remodel the plumbing and heating systems and things. So it'd be, wouldn't increase space, it wouldn't change the rules, it wouldn't change the things. Just those three things. And I did add 15% to it, but just doing those three buildings, basic things, is something like $61 million. And that's the high school, leaving it exactly the way it looks. And I also took out, they threw something in there called soft cost, which, again, going through with Mr. Mursky the other day, we looked at things that, some of the stuff we're actually hoping disappear on. Oh, but there's some things in there that definitely need replaced.
This was the previous firm, right?
Right.
Which I don't lend a whole lot of confidence in some of their numbers.
I
So,
understand that, but again, I don't think we're going to come up with $30 million is going to cover the whole district cost, considering, it's just, I think you're probably talking 60 million. If you want to do even just a renovation of high school, you're probably talking close to 100 million by itself.
and I'm not against the new building. We're just going to have to be very prudent in how we sell this to the community versus just saying, hey, we need a new high school, guys, 150 million.
We had that discussion before. I
we
don't
understand.
agree with you.
It doesn't build a base by holding back on the tax increases you're going to have to make. And I believe that most taxpayers, if you speak to them, they would much rather see a gradual increase over time or something that they can know and count on than to put it down the road and then maybe have to level a 4 or a 5% increase on them.
And that may not.
And that may
with
not
big
cover it.
deficits, It may not be possible.
It may not be possible.
Just the way of information, I talked to a Penn Manor board member, it's on the IU board with me, and they did not start their accelerated tax increases until they had a number. And secondly, after their building is now in, they are talking possibly a 0 to 1% this coming year. So
It also highlighted 2 straight years they went to index.
That's correct.
understood.
After 6 years of
And
0%.
referendum. I'm sorry,
After,
Dylan.
I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just said that was also after 6 years of no increases at all.
Correct.
Which is,
And if you look back at our history, which is not displayed here, I can tell you that we had numerous 0% years prior to 2017 as shown here. So it demonstrates that as a board and as a series of boards, the can has been kicked down the road and there's a resistance to financing the future.
And I would also just highlight that their millage is higher than ours currently as well.
Correct.
It seems to me that there is a consensus from at least 5 board members around the idea of 3%. And if I'm mistaken in that, then we can keep talking, but otherwise, maybe we move on.
And we're looking for a recommendation to take back to the next meeting, correct? So we need to come away with a percent.
So we need
Recommendation.
to pass a resolution to advertise for public inspection. We only have so much time to do that. So we really need
So
to.
do you need action tonight on this? No,
No,
just
no,
a
we
recommendation.
just a
for the next
recommendation.
meeting. Well, I think you know where I stand. I'm at the 3%. Do I think we're going to come in better than that? Absolutely. Do I think there's plenty of place to, I want to say, put some in savings for a project like this? I do. I don't think it's going to be terrible if we would do less, in fairness, but I think it's the right thing to do for the long-term gain.
So at 3%, we still will have a small deficit, just to make sure you understand.
On paper.
On
yes.
paper, correct.
Assuming flat funding.
I'm fine with 3% for all the reasons that have been articulated.
I'm not sure I understand, Dylan.
That's assuming nothing from the state.
Yes, agreed.
We're going to come there.
We'll be fine. Mr. Keener,
I said, I'm fine with 3%.
Mr. Donato,
Come back to me in this. I'd be okay with 3. I think I'd be okay with 2.5, simply because of the state funding. I think we should at least allocate something in there that the state is going to give us money. And if we don't, then instead of putting in 5 billion, I think that's points.
bless you. Thank you, Mr. Donato. Anything else?
No, I think if you're asking me, I think I would go with 2.5.
All right, Mr. Bard,
I'm the minority and I'm at 2.
Mrs. Johnston,
3.
okay,
2.
Charles. And I can live with 3. I would prefer to stay at 3.5 and be in concert with what we did last year. I think it sends an even message and a consistent message to our taxpayers that we have to continue to pay for the future. All right,
No, I'm sorry,
so
Mr. Donato, what was your number?
we don't have consensus as it stands. I believe that we have enough input, though, to say that we could budget 3%. Does that sound reasonable to those in this room? To present as our final budget?
That's fine with me.
That's fine with me. And if you wanted me to give a little, I think I would be willing to consider, I know we didn't split the difference of your 2.5, but if we had to try to come to some other consensus, could we do 2.75? I could get behind that. I would still prefer the 3.
I mean, I guess I would say, to Mr. Donato's point, you're concerned about the state money coming in.
Yeah, I just think we should consider getting something, not the 1.5 million, but even like 500,000 from that and
Well,
go to whatever.
Perhaps, and this is just sort of spitballing now. Perhaps we say 3%, but with the understanding that if the state comes in, that we take the incremental money and.
We won't know that.
Yeah.
You won't know
Unfortunately.
that. You won't know.
Have that discussion.
Yeah.
The only thing you can do is reserve that money for future use and commit it to something like capital reserve. And it would be a prudent investment. We know that. Mr. Bard, no change of heart? No comment?
I would meet somewhere, but I'm not coming to 3. You don't need me to, so it's fine.
Okay. Mrs. Johnson?
I'd be willing to do the 2.75 or 2.5.
Charles?
I don't know. We're missing 2 board members here, unfortunately, so.
And they're not available. Is that correct, Mr. Dandridge? They're not online.
That's correct.
Mrs. Hall, from a budget standpoint,
I mean, if you put 3 in for the May meeting, we can still change it. It's not too late to change it, correct?
Right.
Right.
We could still have discussion
You could
prior
put
to.
3.
We could still change it,
Potentially.
correct?
Right.
At
It's
that
not too
meeting.
late. So that's probably the thing to do because there's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2.5 and me and Dylan at 2. So the majority, it's not the majority of the board, but the majority sitting here are at 3. So in my mind, that makes sense, the one to bring to the May meeting.
All right, so as a board, we concur, we'll go with 3.
And again, that's.
And
just to be
it's
able to
tentative, it's
advertise.
just to go to advertise
Yes.
and final.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good discussion. Mrs. Hall, does that meet your requirements?
Does, thank you.
Okay, you are next on board again for our vision contract renewal. So sorry to put you on the hot seat once again.
This will be a quick one. Oh, thank you. So our vision plan that we added, I guess, 2 years ago for our support staff and administrators is coming up for renewal. We have a rate pass, so the rates have not changed. We just need to approve the contract and it'll be on the agenda at the May board meeting. So just bringing it here to committee in case there's any questions about the plan, about the coverage, about the rates.
Okay, is there anything else? Any questions from the board? All right, moving on. That concludes my action items for finance for this evening. And I would conclude the finance meeting. Would we like to have a 5-minute recess?
Yes.
All right, let's recess for 5 minutes. We will return at 7:45. You good, Charles?
You with our buildings and ground meeting. We'll start out with our first item is our stadium track. Ms. James.
Yes. Good evening. So I wanted to speak with you this evening regarding our stadium track. Now, if you'll recall, both the stadium track and the field were replaced at the same time. We have been watching the track, watching different problems, areas in the track. We've been reviewing it. And I brought the company that did the track originally, I brought them in to take a look at it. We have some real concern areas in the particularly the starting lanes, things like that, the curves, as you approach the long jump, the takeoff for the long jump, as you approach the high jump, takeoff for that as well. So I had them come in and I had them take a look at it. I said, what can we do about this? Well, because of the time frame, we're approaching the time frame where we can do one of two things. Our first option is to have them come in and they would take care of the problem areas, as I just mentioned. In some cases, they would need to cut out part of the track and put in new. And in other cases, they would just resurface the top layer of the track. In order for us to do that, you're looking at $16,170. They would also come back after they did the repairs and so forth, and they would put any painting on there, correcting any line painting that they had disrupted, that sort of thing. Next slide. The other option is option two. Option two, let me step back 1 second. If we were to do the repairs on the previous screen, that would get us to next summer. It's not going to buy us more time than that. Maybe 2 summers if we're really pushing it, but it's only going to buy us a year. So the second option is resurfacing. This does not mean we're ripping up the entire track. What this means is they would resurface the top layer. They would take off the top, shave the top layer, repair any anything like we discussed previously. This would take care of the top layer of the track, and they would replace it with the new surface, same color red, and they would reline according to the standards. That would take approximately 3 weeks out of the summer where we would have the track shut down. So that would mean that no one would be able to access the turf field as well. To do that, that's going to get us about 8 to 9 years. These numbers are very much dependent on the weather, cold, freeze, thaw, that sort of thing. So it's an estimate, but that would get us about 8 to 9 years. They did give us an alternate option, which is listed there, what they would do is add a polyurethane coat before they put that top layer on. This would seal and protect the track even further, and then they would put the top layer, the top coat on. They're estimating that that's going to give us 12 years till we have to do something again, dependent on winters and things like that. So in my mind, the very least I feel like we should do, because we would be right back at the same point next year, is we should do the resurfacing of the track. I'm not saying that we need to do the polyurethane coat. That's going to gain us more time, but at the very least, because next year, if we just do the renovation or the repairs this year, next year we're going to be back at the same place, and it's the likelihood of it being more costly is very good for the repairs that they would have to do, or the refinishing that they would have to do at that point. So that is my suggestion at this point, would be to do option two, not saying that we have to do the resealant part of it. I don't have to, this is not a voting item tonight. These funds would we would use funds from the bond that are in the capital projects funds. As I mentioned, the whole project would be about 3 weeks. that we would have to have the stadium closed over the summer months.
Mrs. James, can you
Yes.
tell me, I've been here long enough to remember, I think we did a resurfacing how many years ago? Do you know when that was last? The last time we resurfaced the track? Anybody
Prior,
else recall here?
this very last time,
The last time I thought we did a complete resurfacing of the track, but I don't remember when.
the last time when we put the new field in, we did an entirely new track, means we took it down to the ground level, to the stone level.
Okay,
And we put the entire new track in. That's not necessary this time. What
Okay.
they would do is actually shave off the
understood.
top layer.
But what year was that? Do you know?
2015.
Okay, so it lasted about 8 years.
Right. This summer we would be approaching 8
That's
years.
kind of what they're predicting.
Correct.
Okay,
Now, we
and is there just one game in town? Is there multiple people that can do this? Did we just get one bid?
I did in this case, yes. I went back to the company that did the first, that did it the last time.
Is there other people that do this?
I can check around certainly and see.
I
if
mean,
that-
I think it would be that amount of money worth getting a second bid if somebody can do the same thing, you know? I don't know what everybody else thinks here.
I think that would be wise, especially if we're considering the resurfacing.
I do have a follow-up question. Mr. Brammersky,
Yes.
do you recall, or Mrs. James, maybe you know the answer, do we charge the district when we host the track and field events at all?
So
Is there any revenue associated with that?
the revenue, I mean, there are some funds that come to us, but all the revenue that comes in goes to the district to help offset.
Right, I recognize that, but I was just curious, do we
There are
have,
some funds that do come to us when those events do occur. But
it's only a couple,
it's not a lot.
$1,000, 500?
We have a league meet here and I think, I would assume we get some money from that. We have the league meet
Right.
here every year.
Right.
We could ask our athletic director, but
Well,
we get a lot of people paying a lot of money and there's a fee, I'm sure.
We don't
Right,
get the gate.
But we have
We
the
don't get the
district
gate.
final.
What's that?
too.
We do not get the gate.
Correct.
We have to charge something though to the league, right?
We don't get any of the gate funds when people come in.
Oh, okay.
We do get, some of the concession stands, and then we also get, there are some costs that come in. They take care of all the PIAA officials and all
Okay.
of those components.
Yeah.
But it's a nominal amount that comes to us.
The concessions go to the varsity club.
Yeah,
The big thing is you get to host and it's cost neutral and your athletes are at home, your parents and families get to be at home. There's an advantage there. As far as making money from the event, no.
I was
It's-
just
it-
trying to see if there was any financial offset that we could use in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of this cost. I just did some very quick math, and if you do the polyurethane coating and the resurfacing, that's an additional charge, right?
That's
Mrs.
correct.
James? So you'd be at 242,000. The amortized cost on that over 12 years is like $20,170 or something to that effect. Okay, call it 20K a year, amortized over 12 years. So that's the annual cost you're thinking about in terms of wear and tear to do a new track. And if we can get another 4 years of longevity, maybe it's worth putting it in now.
Your annual cost is actually higher if you only do the 172. It makes sense to do what
Well,
you're saying.
you are absolutely correct. Your annual cost would be higher. That's why I would be an advocate for definitely doing the seal coat, because you increase the life 50%. You went from basically 8 or 9 years to 12 years. So it makes a great deal of sense to do that. And it also protects the natural gradient of the track, which was one of the fundamental issues we had the last time. Remember that, Charles?
Yeah.
The slope of the track was incorrect. And that's extremely critical to distance running and also your shorter runs as well.
I just have a question because I'm not following your numbers. If I take the 172, 220 and I divide that by 9 years, my annual cost comes out to be 19,135.
That's correct. But she said if you do the spray, then your annual, you can get 12 years of wear out of the surface.
It takes you to 20,000 per year, correct?
Correct.
The difference was we were figuring on 8 years because she said 8 or 9.
Even at 8, it's still about 21 to 20. So what I would
Correct.
suggest is that your resurfacing without the polyurethane is about an annual cost that's very similar to whether you add the polyurethane or not.
They're
for
very close. They're
financial
within
gain.
$1,000, but it's about longevity and maintaining the integrity of the underlying surface.
And I would say in 8 years, it's going to cost more money to do
It
this.
certainly will.
So you're getting your amortized costs spread over that time to save.
I'm not disagreeing, but one thing that I know sometimes occurs, and I'm not suggesting to be an expert on tracks, but the polyurethane seal coat, sometimes those guarantees don't look like quite what they are. I would want something in writing that guarantees us the life of that expense in the contract if they're going to resurface it, so that at the end of the day, we don't end up putting a polyurethane on there that I would consider just smoke and mirrors when it comes to extending the life of the track.
I would also recommend, in addition to see if there's any other contractors, vendors, reach out to Mr. Landis and we have some track coaches that are pretty knowledgeable about these tracks and probably know a lot of technicalities and polyurethane a lot more than we know, and have him involve some of the coaches and get back to you, because they can probably advise us what Justin's saying. Maybe they'll say, oh, polyurethane is not a good thing, or it is a good thing. I don't know.
I guarantee you, you're getting no guarantee.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Well, you're not going to get it because what they're going to say is, we have no idea if you're going to take care of it properly.
Correct.
And I would say it's not just the taking care. Mrs. James talked about the weather elements. Plus the other thing that, you know, I was just at the high school, there was a track student at the student council, really much looking forward to getting the track resurfaced. So I'm really questioning, can it really get to 12 years when you look at the heavy use of the track, no matter what they put down on it, you know, from a running standpoint. And I guess the other part of that, which we have not talked about, is while this Mrs. James shared, you know, the track would be closed for 3 weeks in the summer. But other than that, during daylight hours, basically our track is open to the community. And so there are people who are coming out, walking and
Yes.
running on the track.
Yes, that happens a lot.
And again, not that that's a lot of wear and tear, but it is extra use. And it's not always at times things that we're able to monitor.
Right.
Especially weekends, off hours, et cetera, as to what's actually occurring. So whether people are bringing food, drinks, et cetera, that, you know, anything beyond water, all of those things do impact the use of the track. So.
And I don't want to belabor this, but when we put a brand new track in start to finish in 2015, technically, if my math is correct, we've only gotten 8 years out of a brand new track. I struggle to believe we're going to get 12, 14, 15 years out of a resurfaced and polyurethane track. It kind of reminds me of, okay, I'm going to get my carpet cleaned. I'll have a stain master put on top of that. And now I won't have any problems with stains. And about a year after that, the stains are there. I just question that enough that I would at least think it's worth following up on. And then the follow-up, this is more strategic, and I think I know the answer to this, but if we're going to consider a project around a new high school, the last thing I would want to do is invest 15 years worth of dollars in the track, only to find out that we're going to rip and tear at something over there. So I just want to make sure that we're not planning to move anything before we do an investment there, only to find out we have to tear it up anyway. So not for tax purposes, Mr. Maris, but for purposes of not wasting dollars on a 15-year repair versus a 2-year repair, I would want to know if there's any suggestions about changing any kind of location if we're going to do a large project.
And maybe that does make sense to do the first option based on that, because we don't know what we're going to do with a new building. If we do a new building.
I mean, if we're positive we're not going to go over there, I have no problem moving ahead potentially with the 172. I'm probably not as excited about the polyurethane, but I might be wrong.
I feel like we're at the used car dealership right now, deciding if we want the underbody treatment. The underbody treatment on our car. I have a quick question here, though, Mrs. James. The company that is proposing to resurface, is that the same company that first installed it?
Yes.
And you're saying without the polyurethane, without the underbody treatment, they're saying it's gonna be 10 years.
Eight to nine.
8 to 9.
Okay, because that was my question. It's like they put the whole thing in 8 years ago. Now they're saying it needs to be replaced.
Yeah, so no,
And-
it would be 8 to 9.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're not replacing the whole thing right now. They're not going all the way down to the stone. They would just be shaving the top layer.
I guess I'm a little bit leery of them when they say that their whole when the new car doesn't last any longer than the used car that they want to sell us now.
I have a question. 4 or 5 years ago, there was a repair done on the track. And there was a problem. Those of you that were on the board then, when they dug down, they found out they didn't lay the surface, the under surface properly. Do you remember
They
that?
fixed that.
Yeah.
That was,
They fixed
It
that.
wasn't the
that was
track.
the
No,
quad.
no, no, no.
Yes.
And that's what was causing the drainage problems in the quad.
Again, I would also ask you to reach out to the track coaches and the athletic director. They live and breathe this stuff and they see other people's tracks. And they probably know more than anybody about polyurethane, new tracks, and they may even have a different vendor to look at. So I'd start with Mr. Landis and he can work down.
Was the person who did the work in the quad the same people that do this
Yes,
type of project?
yes.
And they did it wrong.
No,
Or
they didn't do, they were
incomplete.
correcting from the original time.
From the
They had to go
original
back and
contract.
correct from the original time it was installed. That
Correct,
the,
which
that
is
the
not-
quad was installed.
No, what I was asking, is it the same company?
Oh,
Yes.
that did the original install of the quad?
The quad portion that had to be repaired, part of the reason it had to be repaired was that the layers underneath the surface were not properly done. And so they had to dig it up and I remember there was a long discussion about it. I don't remember how much it cost.
And that
So
was,
what I'm asking is is this the same company that did the quad?
originally, I don't know, I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay,
It's a valid question.
yeah, because they evidently it was like laying a highway and they didn't put,
Yeah,
like the rock.
That had to be corrected with this
Right.
last time that we had that we had the quad redone.
I'm just going to make a suggestion that we consider doing the running track surfacing repairs at the 16,000. That will give us maybe 2 years. That would buy us a little bit of time. In a worst case scenario, we've spent $16,000 just to make sure that we're not going to have any disruption to the track as a whole. I think that's a wise short-term decision. And that allows us and buys us 2 years to get a little deeper into the strategic plan. So I'll just put that out there. That would be my recommendation currently.
Mrs. James, to that point, one question that I had with option one, with just parts of the track,
Yeah, it's nice.
about what percentage of the track would you say, ballparking it, would they potentially be cutting up and putting new track on, when they're resurfacing?
A lot of what they would be doing would be shaving off, not cutting up and replacing.
And then so when they put the new top coating then down and putting new paint, how much of our track is going to look discolored because they're not gonna be able to match the color since that's been there for 8 years in the elements, would you say?
It's kind of spotty,
Spotty.
really. Yeah, to be honest, because it's the jumping lane where you take off for the long jump. It's the arc of the high jump. And then there's the areas where the starting blocks would be. So the starting blocks, they dig into the track and they, just.
It's the high usage areas.
Right. It's it's gonna be spotty. It's not all one area.
So maybe,
Can't they color match? I mean, isn't that the first thing they teach you at the CTC is how to color match paint? I mean, they should be able.
I just had my.
I would think I would think it's not gonna look like an eyesore or anything. You might, if you get down and inspect it closely, see a little bit different in shade, but I don't think it's gonna be, I wouldn't think it'd be pronounced.
I guess one question, probably just with that, to look at option 1 and 2, going back and bringing, checking with other companies
Mhm.
and looking at what those options are, given that nothing's voting on here tonight, we'll be able to come back and share those updates.
Sure.
To be able to really kind of zone in and maybe with another company coming out, maybe put a visual up and we can, show the board, here's everything that needs to be addressed.
Sure.
They might have some different ideas too. That's the other thing good about getting a second vendor, if there is a second vendor.
And I would just say, yes, I think it's good talking with coaches, athletic directors, but could you also then check with the building and grounds directors, your colleagues, to see the, what they're seeing on their end, because sometimes we know people want something more than maybe what is needed.
Sure. Sure.
Well, I know Mr. Landis was at Warwick when they when they put their brand new track in. Also, just real quick, good thought on, worrying about or considering the new school. But when we met with all the different architects, they all gave us presentations and not one single person considered displacing the entire football stadium. They talked about 3 different concepts and all of them were either refitting where we're at or moving across the street, moving from where the girls softball field is to the end of the other fields. Because displacing an entire football stadium, you're talking millions of dollars.
Yeah, I have a little PTSD from a previous district that redid all their tennis courts and a bunch of parking and everything. Only a year or 2 later to do a building project and tear it all up and move it. So I come from a place of knowing it's happened before and I don't want to see us go down that same path.
Again, I think just get a second or third vendor in and come back with their recommendation. They may have different recommendations too.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
any other comments in this issue? All right, let's move on to LPC playground equipment.
Yes. So as you remember, we're doing some paving and concrete project this summer. One of the last things to button up on this is the Landisville Primary Center playground. The playground equipment, what they refer to as the big toy, that was moved to Landisville Primary Center when the old LIC was torn down. So it is significantly aged and is showing significant wear and tear. So we reached out to George Ely Associates and got some pricing for replacement of that. The costs that you're seeing here for the play structure, the mod. The cost of the structures plus the installation included in that. And I have a picture on the next slide to show you so you can kind of see. But we would also then think that we also would want to put the port and play surface underneath this play equipment. As we've talked about port and play surfaces before, this particular cost for the port and play, that obviously that's for the installation. I did get a second quote on that. The quote for that is as I said, all of our the structures themselves will be coming from Ely Associates. That's where all of our structures in the district are. Company. If you want to go to the next slide. So here you can see how they're all going to be combined together. They're that you can see the big structure or what they call the big toy, and then the Mod Pod, which is the piece to the far right. So that's what we would be proposing to put in the new playground area.
Any questions, comments? I like that picture. It makes me want to be a kid again.
There were some drainage issues, I think, at LIC. Has that been corrected? On the play-
Talking about LPC.
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
And on the
LPC.
blacktop.
Yes.
That'll be
Sorry.
connected with the paving.
Correct. Yeah, the rest of the playground that is not where the structures are, that is also that's part of the project as well, being
Okay,
repaved.
okay, thank you.
I just have one quick question. The ground surface that underlays the three pieces of equipment, is that mulch or is that new space aged dreaded stuff that we were talking about.
I think we debated about that a
Yeah.
few months back.
Yeah,
What? Yeah, what we would do is the port and play, what they refer to as the port and play.
Okay.
So it's a surface that is similar to the track surface, but more sturdy, sorry.
did it have polyurethane on it?
No, it's just not. But it is it's a different compound and it is more compacted.
But it's not mulch.
It is not, no,
Okay. Oh, just
And if a kid falls, it's not like falling on concrete if their head hits the surface,
absolutely.
because that's going to happen.
That's correct.
Any other questions, comments? All right, it's like the last item on the agenda is giving us an update on the summer projects.
This will be quick. There is not a whole lot going on. We're moving forward with the concrete and paving projects. We have gone on to the first round of visits to site visits with the contractor. That York Excavating is the contractor for this project, and we have met with them for the first round of pre-construction meetings. So that is moving forward. The steam pipe, that is, I just confirmed with the vendor yesterday that they are moving forward with beginning that project, returning to that project right after school lets out. So the 30th of May, they should be returning to that project to complete that and to button it up and then get it concreted. And then HVAC for the Warstown and Mountville, we are moving forward and we have had some pre-construction meetings with that as well. We've began receiving parts into the vendor's location. They're keeping all of the units at their site until they can begin working. They will begin working on May 30th as well.
Refresh my memory, what are those two projects again?
We're replacing all of the HVAC in Roarstown and Mountville elementaries. And if you recall, those are each 20 years old.
Those are the ones we bought ahead of time and we have them and now the contractor is going to put them in.
Correct. We purchased the equipment separately from the contractor.
Okay, any questions for Mrs. James?
I have a question.
Mhm.
I don't remember if this was already done previously or if it's upcoming on some of the loading docks where the steps are, there's crumbling concrete, loose banisters. Has that been repaired or is it going to be repaired?
There have been, particularly at the high school, we had several concrete issues at steps and things like that that was repaired last summer.
Okay.
So we have addressed those. We're trying to address them building by building. Each year, it's going to be a phased project because it's too much to do. It was too much to do in 1 year. But we have taken care of a number of those issues. Yes.
The worst ones?
Yes,
The
correct.
Really wobbly.
Correct.
wobbly ones. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. I don't have any other buildings and ground items. There's no action items. Are we doing this elementary ELA program? Brother, Mr. Danich is going to give us an update.
Yes, so as you know from the Ed Program's presentation, we were asking for a vote this evening. We were doing that mainly so that we could lock in our training dates for this summer. Since that time, some good questions have come up from board members, and we are working diligently to get that information back to you. So we are asking to delay that vote to the May 9th board meeting. We have been working with both companies that were part of the pilot to reduce their costs and their quotes. We do have updated information and Mr. Brmersky, Mr. Hoffman and myself are meeting with both companies this week to get finalized quotes and to get some answers to the questions. Some of the questions just because I know we've heard various questions from several of you that we've been fielding and are researching some answers on are concerning the shipping and handling costs that were in the quotes, collecting data about the programs that we piloted, and what supports there are for those programs. Some of the questions about the differences in the online and the print materials between the two programs, and then how we originally selected our programs for the pilot. So we want to have all those answers to you so that you can make an informed decision. So like I said, we're asking for that vote to move to May 9th.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other Don't see any other business today. Is that it?
I just had a comment about what Dr. Danges just brought up. I spent a lot of time thinking about this since our last meeting. And I appreciated very much the updates and the challenges, but the efforts to get good information, for lack of better words, to us on how the kids are responding, the students are responding, the teachers are responding. Wish more parents would have responded, but it is unfortunately what it is. You gave a great presentation, and we recognize, or I recognize, that we may have not seen the results immediately that we had hoped, understanding that it takes time to get those results in a program over time. So I can't help but wonder if it wouldn't make some sense to, instead of adopting one of the two policies immediately, or programs, excuse me, one of the two programs immediately, to consider if there's any option to post the pilot for both of them again for an additional year and encourage additional teachers to be involved in a pilot, which will encompass more students and give us more data, more time to see which one truly stands out over the other, if any, and also give it an opportunity for it to perform over 2 years rather than one. We could see results and test scores over the time. I realize that it affects the opportunity of ESSER dollars, but maybe there'd be a possibility that we buy some of the materials, knowing that you have to buy materials for Savas anyway, regardless, moving on, because it's workbooks, right? Wit and Wisdom, you'd have to buy books, but if hypothetically you took Savas over Wit and Wisdom, would there be an opportunity maybe to recover some of that initial expense to sell it to another district that's going through the same situation as for a partial price? And that cost difference would be investment in doing our due diligence to make sure we definitely get the right program. Me personally, I know the teachers need it. I've spoken to several of them that were super excited about what they're doing every day and how their children, their students are responding. I mean, there's been no deviation from that. The only difference I've seen is I've had a lot more conversations. In fact, only conversations with people promoting Wit and Wisdom. I haven't actually spoken to a teacher candidly about their experience with Savas, and I'm not blaming them for that or anybody other than I just haven't been exposed to that. I will say that when we had the presentations, the first time it was 6, 3 from each, and then I don't remember after that being presentations from Savas instructors moving on. And another thing that's maybe completely unrealistic, but just in my mind, the possibility, maybe unrealistic, of the teachers that presented or piloted Savas would move on to Wit and Wisdom and vice versa. I realize that would take an enormous amount of training or investment on their part, but that would give us a true scope that we don't know if certain teachers were just better teachers. I mean, I hate to say that, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we had really strong teachers volunteered for the pilot on both sides. I feel very confident about that.
Sure, I think they're all great.
Yeah, and I didn't think your suggestion otherwise. I think there's some financial implications to extending a pilot, but we want to pull some of that information together. Again, we know it's a big decision. We've been working on this for 18 months. We don't want to rush through a vote, without having all the facts together. So we'd like to collect that all to you and present it over the next couple of weeks so that you have what you need to make the right decision.
I just, with the data we've received on our own and based on everything out there, I really hate to invest this money, jump in and train everybody, have 2 people working to train everybody, and then a year from now, our results are no better than what we just got. And then what do we say?
My expectation and hope is that we are going to see tremendous results, but yes, I understand that fear. That is one of the unknowns going into adopting a new program.
Dr. Dandridge, Mr. Hoffman and I, as he shared, we have a meeting on Thursday, and one of the questions that we have is regarding additional data, from the companies, given that they're relatively newer programs, And a lot of the programming data is coming from kind of pre-COVID. That's all that they're providing at this point. And so other districts that are either using Wit and Wisdom or Savas are in their infancy of using those programs. So local districts, whether it's in the county or across the state, are in that same boat. It's very limited as to what's available. So that's some of the questions that we have for them, in addition to the potential options for not only adoption to, whether it is extending a pilot, or I wouldn't necessarily maybe want to say extending the pilot, but really trying to hone in on one of two programs, given that the teams of teachers looked at multiple programs that met not only the science of reading criteria that's coming from the state, but also what's really out there and available that's current. And so the teams of teachers that work through this process really narrowed down to two programs. And one of the challenges we face is some of that absence of data. And I am hesitant to use their initial data that they're presenting to do any, for lack of a better word, comparisons, because their methods of analyzing their programs are different. And when you go cross state, you look at different tests. We've had conversations around what does it look like when we get the state assessments back, and if the decision's made and we see it coming the other way, with the other program, and what does that look like? And so those are some of the questions that we want to follow up. But I would say overwhelmingly, not only from teachers that I've talked to in their classrooms, we need a program. That is kind of unwavering with regards to a recommendation at this point. There needs to be a program. And in terms of what that is, I think it's important to be able to bring you back information that is as detailed as we can get based on the questions. But I do want to see us continue to move forward and ensure that we do provide our teachers with a strong resource in terms of trying to make sure it's fully vetted and looking at all the data elements. That's something we're going to be pushing back, and then we will bring you that information and talk about all possible options for us as we move forward. Not only on those option piece, but looking at the financial implications of all of that, just so that everyone's clear. And I think Dr. Dandridge's point is really important. We've committed to you as a board for years now, since I've been here, that we're going to provide you with as much information as we can for you to make the most informed decision at the time you need to make it. So we'll do that, and we'll bring that back to you and for a discussion, and then see where that goes from there. But I'm looking forward to our meeting on Thursday.
I don't want to overstep our bounds as a board, but it warrants a question or a thought that just came to mind. Would it be asking too much to have a representative from each of those companies be part of the meeting and allow us to hear from each of them or their group? If that's not appropriate, I'm fine with a no to that, but it is a big investment for us, and maybe it'll help us with the decision, which has been difficult, and I know we're all taking very seriously.
I actually, Mr. Walker, I really like that idea. I think that the faculty and administration have been put in kind of a tough spot here, because the board has questions about the efficacy of both programs, whether they're necessary, whether the content is appropriate, whether they're cost effective. And speaking for myself, I would love to be able to ask the representative companies directly to address some of the concerns that we have, rather than expect the administration to run or have to run interference for them when maybe they don't have all the information. So I would personally find that very helpful. I also would want to say that it's certainly no secret that I've been dubious about both of the programs, whether we're better off with something homegrown that our faculty and staff, faculty can curate themselves. My thinking is evolving on that. I've talked to a lot of people, and it does sound like there are some benefits to having a curriculum that provides greater continuity, but I'm not 100% on board yet. And I want to hear directly from people who are advocating for these, what the benefits are, and making sure that we've gotten the very best possible deal for our taxpayers. And when I see shipping costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for what amounts to cartons of books, it makes my antenna go up. And I want to hear a lot more information about that.
I have a question, just because I don't remember when we have to use these particular ESSER funds.
So the ESSER funds for ESSER 3 would run out September 2024. So we can use them for next school year's program. We cannot use them for a program in 24-25.
So we could still be able to use them and wait until we get all the test results back, which usually show up around October, early October, to do a comparison.
You could pay for materials for next year to use for next year. And if you're waiting till October to get results, you're not going to have those materials ordered. I guess I'm not sure if I understand what you're asking.
I was just wondering how long we have to use those ESSER funds, and then if there's some way to get the information, still be able to meet the timeline for the expense, for the charging of the expense, that sort of thing. Because it sounds, and I know this is not, I'm pretty sure this is not possible, because Savas is consumable. And I guess the workbook is for 1 year. I'm not sure if it's for 1 year, like one semester. We just purchase some of those books and just reuse all of this, for a semester or until we make a decision.
Yeah, one of the things we'll bring back to you for sure is what the financial implications, both for the district budget and for the ESSER dollars, would look like if we were to extend the pilot or if we were to purchase a program now.
Thank you.
I'm going to assume when they come back to a shipping cost, they're just going to redistribute that somewhere else. That has to be a revenue stream that they've just allocated to that.
So, yeah, I have more.
I said, I'm going to assume pretty confident of my assumption, since those of you know, I've owned a trucking company for 30 years. So those shipping costs are just another revenue stream. And they're just going to reallocate their revenue stream somewhere else if they lower the shipping costs. I think I reached out to you and specifically asked if we could buy it that customer pick up, which is.
We are exploring all those options. We have asked those questions. We do have updated information and we'll make sure you have it.
Is it your, not to like belabor the suspense here, but is it your sense that the message has been heard?
We have already received breaks on the shipping costs to lower that percentage. And we've also gotten some additional clarification on what that dollar amount was for. So, yeah, it was 6 years worth of the shipping and it was the guarantee and there were a bunch of items associated there, but there are a couple options for us.
So can we get them here?
So we meet with them on Thursday. We certainly can talk to them about that and see what the options are, and we'll definitely let you know.
We'll bring that up on Thursday.
Yep. We'll extend the invitation.
All right, are we all done? Are we ready to adjourn? We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, meeting adjourned.